Amen. You may be seated. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Good to see you all back again. I didn't scare too many off last week. Is there anyone not here today that was here last week? Give us a wave. Oh, a few people didn't catch on. That's okay. But I hope I didn't scare too many people off last week. Because it's not supposed to be scary. Jesus is the centre of it all. We just sang that song, and as we were singing, I'm thinking, that's right. He's won it all. So, but we did start looking last week at some end times and interpreting end times in the light of what's happening in the world. What in the world is happening. And I shared last week that one of the great themes that runs through the New Testament is the expectation that Jesus can return at any moment. And if that's the case, then people would need to interpret all the end times, the book of Revelation, in light of what's happening in the world today. Otherwise, we get away from that great theme that Paul addresses in his first ever letter when he says, don't stress, Jesus hasn't come back yet. Because we make a list and say, all these things have to happen then. And we've taken away the imminent return of Christ as a doctrine within the church. And I shared that, but the problem with that, of course, is that every time God pours out his Spirit, there's a revival and a renewal. That expectation is revived, and so people then start to look. And so it's got to be fluid. I was talking to someone during the week and I said, I got a book on my shelf at the Bible when I was at Bible college. Used it at college. I've used it a couple of times since. I love it because I love the title of the book. You don't judge a book by its cover, but I have. And this book is called A Theology of the New Testament. Not theology of the New Testament, not the theology of the New Testament. Hey, this is an opinion. This is a theology of the New Testament. What I'm sharing is a picture of end times. And last week, we started and I said Jesus is the centre of everything. And that includes end times. Somehow we take Jesus, some people take Jesus out of the centre of it when they start talking end times. No, he's the centre even when we talk end times. I said that the church, we only have a cameo in this whole thing. And we're going to, in the whole end time stuff, the church only has a cameo appearance. And we're going to talk about that probably next week. End time, Jesus is at the centre, but end time's all about Israel and God's people. The covenant that God made with Abraham and reiterated with David is an everlasting covenant. It's a covenant that's never going to be broken. And one of the great heresies that has crept into the church, and I praise God people are dealing with it, is this replacement theology that says the church has replaced Israel. Church has never replaced Israel. Read the book of Romans, where Paul says, he said, as hardening has come upon them, they've been set aside, but they're coming back. They're coming back. And Israel has never been cast off. And they're at the centre of all of this. Because it's all about Israel. It's all about their land that God promised them. We started going through some of the main characters. And I showed you last week that I believe the Antichrist is a Muslim. And you can, if you weren't here last week, we can get you the information. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm just going back through it. It's there. It's on our web page and all the rest of it, so you can see it. We'll make DVDs available for people as well if they want to catch up what they miss out on. But I started by saying and showing that I believe the Antichrist is a Muslim. And that has to be, if the Antichrist is a Muslim, then the beast has to be a revived Islamic or confederacy. And I believe that that's the Ottoman Empire that replaced Rome. And so now today we're going to look at 4 other main players, or players in this whole event. The 2 witnesses, the false prophet, the mark of the beast, and Mystery Babylon. And then we're going to put it all together. It's not scary. Jesus is the centre of it all. Okay, let's start with the two witnesses. Let's start with the good guys before we move on to the bad guys. The ones that wear the white hats. Cowboys, the good guys always had the white caps. These are the guys in the white hats. In Revelation, it talks about two witnesses that are in Jerusalem. And for 3 years or 3.5 years, they're prophesying, testifying to the goodness of God. Get 3 theologians together, you get 20 different opinions. We don't know who these guys are, but I put to you that I believe that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah. The reason I say that is because Old Testament is law and prophets. The law came through Moses. Elijah was the main prophet, even though there wasn't a book. Malachi ends with Elijah's going to come before the day of the Lord. In fact, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "What is it that the Pharisees say that Elijah has to come before the Messiah comes?" And he says, "Well, that's true." He says, "But if you can understand and believe it, he already has come." He was speaking about John the Baptist, who came in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And so we speak about that, and the rabbinic rabbis teach that not only is Elijah going to come before the Messiah, and they're looking for their Messiah, but also they believe that Moses is going to come back as well. Rabbinic teaching says that Moses said, "I'm going to raise up a prophet like me." And rabbis believe that that means that Moses, or someone in the spirit of Moses, is going to come before the Messiah. So we've got these two witnesses. What makes me strongly believe that we're talking about Moses and Elijah is, if you have a look at Revelation chapter 11 verse 6, it says that they will have power, these two will have power to shut up the heavens so it doesn't rain. Who did that? Elijah. And it says they'll have power to turn rivers into blood. Who did that? Moses. And so they're going to replicate the miracles that Elijah and Moses did. Now, whether it's actually Moses and Elijah, I don't know. Maybe it's two witnesses that are going to be raised up out of the Jewish nation that are going to operate in the spirit and the power of Moses and Elijah, much like John the Baptist. But they're the two witnesses. They're the good guys. And I get these funny pictures in my head sometimes. And these two, at the end of about 3 years, are going to be killed. And they're going to throw a wild party because these two guys that have been tormenting the beast's kingdom for 3 years are going to be finally killed. And after 3 days or so, God's going to raise them up. Can you imagine the response? But it's only going to be a few days. And when Jesus was raised from the dead 3 days after he was crucified, people still didn't believe it because they said, "Oh, he stole the body. The disciples have stolen the body." And so the witness, the very first people to see that Jesus had risen from the dead, even denied that he was risen. And what's going to happen is God's going to raise up these two witnesses, take them to heaven, and there's going to be people that still won't follow. But they're the witnesses. Now we come to the false prophet. We start with the bad guys. The false prophet is in Revelation chapter 13 and verses 11 to 17, also mentioned in chapter 16, 19 and 20. It says 3 things about this false prophet. First thing, it says he's going to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Revelation 13:11 says, "I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, who had 2 horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon." Jesus warned in Matthew 24, he said, "Be careful. There's going to be false Christs and false prophets come. They're going to deceive people. He said, if anyone says, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So Jesus says false prophets and false Christs are going to come. Antichrist and false prophets are going to come. Be careful. Don't listen to them. Islam teaches that Jesus is coming back. And he's going to attempt to convince the world that he is not the Son of God. Convince the world that he never claimed to be the Son of God. That he never died on a cross. Therefore he didn't rise from the dead. And they believe that this is Jesus. Their false prophet is actually someone that's claimed, I am Jesus. And he's a lamb. He comes like a lamb, like Jesus. But he speaks like a dragon, speaks like the devil. Don't believe it. Second thing about this Islamic Jesus is, and it's confirmed in what it says in Revelation chapter 11, is a partnership. And this false prophet is subservient to the Antichrist. And Islam teaches that when Jesus comes back, when this false Jesus comes back, when their Jesus comes back, he's going to point to the people to the Antichrist. He's going to be a great evangelist, converting, as it were, the world, and trying to turn the world to Islam. Listen to the Islamic end time stuff. It says this. Where are we? And as in the case of the Antichrist and the false, we find one is clearly filling the supporting role while the other is the leader. While the Mahdi, that's the Antichrist, is clearly described as being the leader, Jesus is described as being the one who will espouse the cause of the Antichrist and follow him. The Antichrist and the false prophet perform great miracles so as to deceive many, and there is eschatology says the same thing. They say the same thing. This false prophet is the enforcer. He performs great signs. Revelation 13 verse 13 says he performs great signs so that he may even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by these signs that he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. I was intrigued when I read that again and tied it into this fact that this false Jesus is the false prophet who's calling down fire on those that don't believe. What does that remind you of? James and John, let's call down fire, let's kill them. And Jesus says, you don't know. He says, you don't know what spirit you're of. And so this Antichrist is going to come in the opposite spirit to what Jesus came in. Jesus said, no, don't. You don't know what spirit you're of. Yeah, let's summon the spirit of death and kill them all because they rejected you. Yet this false prophet, this Muslim Jesus, is going to come and do exactly that. You don't follow the Antichrist, you don't follow the Mahdi, we're going to call down fire and destroy you. It's interesting, it's just an opposite spirit. All the way through you see this opposite spirit. Verse 15 of Revelation 13, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor and slave, to receive the mark on their right hand and on their foreheads. The prophet said, there is no prophet between me and him. This is the Antichrist, this is what the Muslims teach. There is no prophet between me and him. That is Jesus. He will descend to the earth. When you see him, recognise him. He will fight the people for the cause of Islam. This is what they teach. This is not a Christian person's perspective on all of this. This is what they actually teach. He will break crosses, kill swine and abolish jizra. Allah will perish all religions except Islam. He will destroy the Antichrist. That's the real Jesus, by the way. And will live on the earth for 40 years, then he will die. Muslims will pray over him. He's going to break crosses. That is killing off Christianity. That's the symbol of Christianity. And they said that's gone. He says, kill swine. To the Islam, the Quran teaches that the Jews are pigs and apes. So when it says he's going to kill swine, it means he's going to destroy Israel. He's going to wipe out. So he's destroying the Jews and he's going to destroy the Christians. Abolish jizra. That's the tax that's imposed on the infidel. If I live in a Muslim country and I'm a Christian, I am given two options: convert or pay tax. Convert to Islam, become a Muslim, or pay an annual tax. And when this false prophet comes, he says it's going to abolish that tax. The only way he can abolish that tax is that there is no such thing as anything other than Islam. And so he's going to be an enforcer. If you don't worship the beast, the enforcer is going to enforce. Still with me? Anyone miserable? We're on the winning side, people. We just need to understand. Someone asked me the other day, are you enjoying this? I said, no, I'm not. Because you read the books and you think, oh, that's nice. Then you read something and you say, oh, I better check that up. So you get on the internet and you start Googling it and you find something. And next thing you know, you're at a Muslim website reading stuff and you think, get off that and you think, I need a shower. But it's good to know that it all kind of is fitting together. And what we're going to do is we're going to see after we go through these things how it all does fit together. Do not stress. We are on the winning side. It's all about Jesus, not about the false Jesus, not about the Muslims. It's about him. It's about Jesus. It's all about him. And as I said to you, we only play a cameo in it anyway. Next thing I want to look at is the mark of the beast. Now, I've got to tell you, maybe your past is not as spiritually sometimes makes out. When I was in a youth group, only been saved a few years, they decided to have a fancy dress party. And we all had to go dressed as a Bible character. So we had Moses there, we had Mary there, we had wise men there, we had angels there. I got an old refrigerator box, drew on, designed it, and I went as a computer and called myself the Beast. So maybe there's some issues there, deep-seated issues, that I would go to a fancy dress party. Of all the Bible characters to choose, I go as the Beast. I couldn't find a sheep. But the Dad's Army would remember this. The rest of you probably don't. I'd been saved just a little while, went to a camp, first exposure to end times preaching, end time stuff. God was all excited because bank card had just come out. Who's seen the old bank card? Show us your age, come on. Yeah, be honest. We're in church. It's the one that, no, you've got to be honest all the time. Remember the symbol for the bank card? 3 colours, 3 different colour bees inside of each other. He got all excited. It's happening! 666! And we've had all the different variations and permutations and combinations of what this means. And the reality is, it's going to become obvious at the time. It's what I've been saying all along. It's going to become obvious all the time. At the right time, it's going to become obvious. We've had people talk about the latest theory is that we're all going to have some RFID, radio frequency identification stuff in our arm. And get the old scanner out, there it's all going to be. Talk about that in a minute. If we're talking about an Islamic Antichrist, if we're talking about the beast being a revised Ottoman Empire, and we looked at all this last week, if the false prophet is a Muslim fake Jesus, then the mark of the beast has to have something to do with Islam. It's got to all flow together. Now, if we have a look at the screen, I'm going to turn my back on you for a while. Let's go to the next slide, thanks. That's called an Islamic Bismillah. Okay? We're going to pray for the back wall at the end of the service. Yep, next slide. It says something. We're going to talk about the last little bit of it. Only the first two words, Bism and Allah, are needed to constitute what's called the Bismillah. Okay, keep going. Let's move on. And they're the two letters, so let's go to the next one. Okay, if we rotate the top, and you can. In Islam, they have them in circles, they have them upside down. So if we look at that, and then the next one is the classic Islamic symbol of the two crosses. Okay. In the name of, it goes from right to left, in the name of Allah, and then you cross swords. Next slide. And the next one. Sigma. Yep. Chi. Xi and Chi. Notice how they're very similar. They're Greek letters. If you add them up, 6 for Sigma, 60 for Chi, Xi, and 600 for Chi, adds up to 666. Maybe what John was describing was not a number, but he was describing a symbol. If you go to the next slide, which is one of the old translations of the Greek, what's underlined in the next slide, I'll show you what it was. There it is. Maybe what John saw was not, he was trying to describe what he saw, and what he saw was the Bismillah, in the name of Allah, which is see, the mark of the beast is a blasphemous name, in the name of Allah. And the next slide, there it is. And that's what jihadists wear, on their head and on their arm. Interesting. A theory. As I said last week, if Jesus doesn't come back for 300 years, I'll be very surprised and I won't care. And someone else will have come up with another explanation for all of this that fits their time. But I believe that the mark of the beast is not some RFID implant in our arms. I don't believe it's the bank card. I believe it's the Bismillah. And here's 4 reasons why I don't believe it's going to be a chip. Now, I don't believe it's going to be a chip, but if Mr. Turnbull gets up there next week and says everyone in Australia's got to get a chip implanted in their arm or they won't be able to buy it, so guess what? I won't be getting it. I don't think he's going to say that. And here's the reasons why. The RFID chip is not a mark, it's an implant. This is a mark that's observable. The only way to see an RFID chip is if you've got an RFID reader, otherwise you don't even know it's there. So what does that mean? It means if no one can buy or sell unless they've got this chip in their arm, every shop, every store, even the street vendors selling hot dim sims after the football are going to have an RFID reader to give you a scan to see if you can buy it. Don't think that's going to happen. I find that a little bit too hard to fathom that could happen. It means that the national soldiers, the Australian Defence Forces, are going to go around, they're going to come in this door, they're going to come up to us and say, are you going to get the implant? And we say no, and guess what? They chop your head off. I don't think the Australian Defence Force is going to do that. It's an issue that, well, I just don't find it plausible. However, if what we're talking about is a Bismillah, then in the name of Allah, on a headband on someone's head, in radical Muslim countries, in cities that have been taken over by ISIS, guess what? Christians and Jews are being beheaded today because they won't renounce their faith. It's happening. And kids as young as 10 are walking around being indoctrinated with the mark, with that Bismillah on their head. It's happening now. I'm not scaring anyone, am I? You're going to come back. You'll come back next week, please. Promise. Promise you're going to come back next week. This is not scary stuff. I don't think so. Because Jesus is Lord. It's all about Him. And so, I believe that the mark of the beast is Islamic Bismillah. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to fess up. Now, Mystery Babylon. 2 chapters in the book of Revelation is devoted to this Mystery Babylon. Following our train of thought. Antichrist is Muslim, is Islamic. Therefore, the beast is Islamic. And a revised Ottoman Empire, I believe, fits with what Revelation says. False prophet is this Muslim idea of Jesus. The mark of the beast is the Bismillah. Then this Mystery Babylon has to have something to do with Islam. Otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Most prophecy buffs agree that the beast is the government aspect of the Antichrist empire, and that the great harlot or Mystery Babylon, city or state or whatever it is the spiritual driver of the beast mechanism, is what's driving it. In Revelation 17 verse 1, we read this. And then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness." Let's stop there. Carried me away in the wilderness. The angel is about to show John Mystery Babylon. So the angel carries John away into the wilderness. Now, if a visitor came to Australia and wanted to see the penguin parade, how many of us here would take them to Ayers Rock? If they wanted to see the Opera House, would you take them to Perth? If they wanted to see a good football team, you wouldn't take them to Essendon. If they wanted to see Ayers Rock, would you take them to Hobart? Come back, George. Forgive me, George. You see what I'm saying? If the angel's going to show John Mystery Babylon, he's taken him to the wilderness. Yet there's people that say, well, the Mystery Babylon, the great harlot of Revelation 17, is Rome or New York and other Western countries. So why take him to the wilderness? Why take him to Ayers Rock to show him a penguin parade? Why take him to Hobart to show him the Sydney Opera House? It doesn't make any sense. The first clue as to what Mystery Babylon is, it's in a wilderness, in a desert somewhere. Psalm 137 verse 7 and 8 says this. Verse 7 and 8. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its foundation, O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed. It's talking about Edom and talking about the daughter of Babylon. They're linked in that one of the kings of Babylon went down to Edom, to a place known as, got it here somewhere, Tamar, Tayma, and it's in Arabia, southeast of Israel, just down around Jordan and into Saudi Arabia. And he went there and he stayed there 10 years because, and they don't really know why he went there for 10 years, but they believe it had something to do with the fact that he was a worshipper of the sun god or the moon god. And that is the foundation and the basis of Islam, worship of this moon god. So there's a link between Edom and Babylon, and in Psalm 137 it says, talking about Edom, it says the daughter or the son, sorry, what is it? O daughter of Babylon. So it's in a wilderness, it's in the southern part of South Jordan and into Saudi Arabia. Isaiah 21, see, this is not just something that's come up in Revelation, it's prophesied all the way through the Old Testament. In Isaiah 21, he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Sounds very familiar to what we read in Revelation 18, which says, he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. This same event is not, it cannot be when the Medo-Persians took over Babylon. Isaiah cannot be talking about that because it says that it's fallen, it's destroyed. It talks about the destruction of Babylon. Babylon was never destroyed when the Medo-Persians took over Babylon. In fact, it remained inhabited. Alexander the Great, who came after them, who defeated the Medes and the Persians, actually lived in Babylon till he died. Babylon was never destroyed. And so when we read scriptures in the Old Testament that talks about the utter destruction of Babylon, it's talking about this mystery Babylon. And we get a clue from that because in Isaiah 21 it says, the burden against Dumah. That's in a place that's very near to a town you might have heard of called Medina. The burden against Arabia, verse 13. Verse 16, all the glory of Kedar will fall. Muhammad was descended from Ishmael's son Kedar. And when it talks about the glory of Kedar has fallen, it's talking about Mecca. The mystery Babylon is Mecca. How do you know? Well, let's have a look at some stuff. Mystery Babylon is the holiest site in Islam. One more that for me proves it. When Mystery Babylon falls, its utter destruction will be seen from the sea. We are told that every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? So what sea are we talking about? Go back to the Old Testament, Jeremiah 49 verse 21, talking about the destruction of Babylon, which has to be Mystery Babylon. It says this, Jeremiah tells us what sea we are talking about. He's talking about the Red Sea. It says that they can see it from the Red Sea. Mecca is only 65 kilometres from the Red Sea. It's talking about Mecca. There's a link between Arabia and Babylon and Babel and its destruction. Speaking of Mystery Babylon, it talks about its burning. In Isaiah 34 verse 9 it says, its streams shall be turned to pitch, and its dust to brimstone. Its land shall become burning pitch. What the beast, the revived Ottoman Empire, will do to Mystery Babylon, Mecca, will be what Saddam Hussein did to Kuwait, but on steroids. Remember the Iraq-Kuwait war? And as Iraq pulled out of Kuwait, they set fire to all the oil rigs, and they burned for months. What's going to happen in Saudi Arabia is that when it talks about pitch in the Old Testament, it's talking about bitumen, it's talking about crude oil. It's talking about oil's going to burn, and it's going to burn forever. But how can you say that a revised Islamic empire is going to come against and destroy its holiest city? I'm glad you asked. They don't like each other, that's why. As I said last week, the whole Islamic confederacy and empire is divided. When it talks in Daniel about iron and clay, and they don't mix, and they don't, and it's always been translated as being Rome. If you look at it from this perspective, they just don't get on. Turkey, they did a poll in Turkey just recently. I'll get the numbers right. I don't want to mislead you. In 2013, there was a survey done, and Turks hold the most negative view of Saudi Arabia out of any surveyed Muslim country, with 26% expressing a favourable view and 53% expressing an unfavourable view. Saudi Arabia and Iran's relationships are fraught with hostility, tension and confrontation. They just don't get on. How many people heard on the news about the Iran cleric that was beheaded in Saudi Arabia just this week? And it's created a massive tension between Iran, and Iran's going to be part of that coalition led by Turkey. It's created all sorts of issues. Just on Friday, this was reported. Muslims in Iran are right now discussing how the Iranian government is going to destroy Saudi Arabia. 2 days ago. Back in October, there was an article in a newspaper that said this: during the 2015 Army Day Parade, Iran's Brigadier General Morteza Kobani, I think I got it right, has revealed that there are 2,000 rockets waiting for the orders from the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to attack Saudi Arabia. Iranians must not be afraid of the enemy threats, said the head of the Revolution and Defence Museum. We won the war with Iraq with the least military equipment. But if Khamenei gave his orders today to attack Saudi Arabia, we have 2,000 rockets ready to set off from Isfahan. They don't like each other. And it says that the beast, the woman is going to ride the beast, which means the power is in the horse. You ride a horse, guess what? Guess where the power is? In the horse. But who directs the horse? The jockey. And so what's happened is you've got a beast, an empire that where the power is. 2,000 rockets aimed at Saudi Arabia. And now they've got nuclear. Now they've gone nuclear. Thank you, Jesus. Yet, for centuries, the direction has been determined by the writer, the centre of the religious centre of Islam, Mecca. But it says, when you read it, 17 and 18, it's not God that destroys the mystery Babylon. It's actually the beast. And they're going to, and so there's going to be this battle, this war. One last point. I'm just checking the watch. I usually have about 2 pages. I've got 8. So it lists of all the. It says that this mystery Babylon, everyone's mourning because the trade has been destroyed. Saudi Arabia has a population about the same size of Australia. Yet it's the 5th largest exporter, obviously, of oil, because of oil, but it's also I think it's about 25 in the list of importers. And everything that you find listed in Revelation 18, 11 and 13 is things that Saudi Arabia imports. And there's gold, and there's a whole list of stuff there. All of them are imported by Saudi Arabia. But verse 13 finishes with this: they trade in the bodies and souls of men. What does that mean? It means slave trade. And in Saudi Arabia is rated as what's called a Tier 3 country. And they are countries whose governments do not fully comply with the minimum standards and are not making significant efforts to abolish the slave trade. Slavery is alive and well in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a destination country for men and women trafficked for the purpose of involuntary servitude and, to a lesser extent, commercial sexual exploitation. Despite strict labour laws and entry visa requirements, men and women from Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Kenya, Nigeria and Ethiopia voluntarily travel to Saudi Arabia as domestic servants or other low-skilled labourers, but subsequently face conditions of involuntary servitude, including restrictions on movement, withholding of passports, threats, physical and sexual abuse, and non-payment of wages. Saudi Arabia trades in the bodies and souls of men. Yet again, the Bible's right. So now we've laid out the players. What do we got? Jesus is the centre. The church has got a cameo appearance. It's all about Israel and the fight for land. The Antichrist is a Muslim leader of a revived Ottoman Empire. The false prophet is spoken of in Islam, and they call him Jesus. The mystery, the mark of the beast, I believe, is the Bismillah. Mystery Babylon is Mecca. And just as a side, as we wind this up, Islamic eschatology actually says they have an Antichrist in Islam, in their eschatology. But if you look, I haven't studied it, but if you look at what this Islamic Antichrist, the characteristics of that, guess who it represents? Guess who's the picture of? Jesus. They got it completely mirrored. And so as I was just putting the final touches on this morning, I thought their eschatology is identical but opposite. A complete mirror image. What's good is bad and what's bad is good, but all the same players are there. So I asked myself the question. They have a saviour, we call it the Antichrist. They have Jesus, we call him a false prophet. They have an Antichrist, we call him Jesus. How do we know we are right? Good question. I want to tell you one event and one verse. One event, one verse. Peter before the Sanhedrin. In earshot of Paul would have heard him. And they said, "Don't you dare preach Jesus." And he says, "This Jesus whom you crucified, God raised from the dead." Paul heard that. He would have been there and he would have heard that. Years later, writing to the Romans, Paul says this: declared to be the Son of God by the power of the resurrection. You see, You can go to Mecca and you can go and find Muhammad's tomb and his bones are still there. You go to Jerusalem, you can pick your spot. No one knows. He wasn't in the ground long enough. Jesus is risen. God's raised him from the dead. Declared to be the Son of God by the power of the resurrection. And it doesn't matter what people try and say, we are not the same. You hear it all the time. Oh, it's all the same. It's not all the same. It's not all the same. And we're on the winning side. We are on the winning side. If you're not on the winning side, no better time to get on the winning side than right now. Jeff will tell you from his bad old days, it's better to back a winner than a loser. Put your money on the winner. And we know the result before the race is run. How many people like to do? You wouldn't call that, you don't call that gambling, do you, when you know the winner from the end before the race is run? You all good?